while the courts decided to
been a topic of conversation at every board meeting and our MPO policy committee meeting and our other committees as well. We've been talking with partners at all levels, whether it's state, whether it's county, municipal, and the transit service boards and other groups as well. I, again, have been out and about talking to you all. We've had the honor of being able to go to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to make sure that folks are well aware of the fiscal cliff that we're facing for our transit system and what we might want to recommend the General Assembly do to help stave off that doomsday scenario. We're getting close to the finish line. This report is due January 1st. And what happens next is that the steering committee that was required by the legislation of business, civic, labor, and environmental organizations will be advancing their recommendations to the CMAP board and the MPO policy committee here. The CMAP board, of course, includes representation from President Darch here. The MPO Policy Committee has representation from across the region, includes Mayor Schilke and also Mayor Brawley as the CMAP board representative to the MPO Policy Committee. But our goal is to bring a set of draft recommendations in September, and then in October, ask both public bodies for approval of the report's recommendations so that we can meet our January 1st deadline. Again, why it's so important that we're here today talking to you about is that mayors from across the region, your communities may not have even access to transit, but I think if we were to talk to folks about whether or not they'd like another way to get around, we've heard a lot about the value that our transit system has, whether it's allowing folks to age in places. I was talking with Mayor Schilke about the senior centers that continue to be developed in his community, or whether it's getting to educational opportunities, healthcare, downtown. Transit does provide a huge value, and it allows us to address our congestion concerns in different ways. And so just to put a highlight on some of the challenges that we will face if we aren't able to close the $730 million annual operating gap, is that it's about a 20% cut to the operations of our transit systems, which would equate to a 40% cut in service. Just back of the envelope math for us on what that might look like on a day-to-day basis. Over 100 cities and villages across the region could lose access to their downtown transit, their train access, that we would see 20 Chicago neighborhoods and 6 suburban communities lose access to CTA train service, and about 150 bus routes would be impacted and cut by this level of funding gap here. So again, we know that people also take transit to the wonderful recreation places that you all have in your communities. I know that I do. And it also impacts mobility for both people, again, who ride the transit system and those who don't. So again, we really think that this is a crucial part of our economy. As local mayors, you know the inherent value that this might have. So your insights as we get to this conversation are particularly valuable to my team as we work on these recommendations here. So that is all I wanted to touch on before you get into the rest of your agenda here this morning, but do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have thoughts today that you want to share. If you have thoughts that you want to share afterwards, we are happy and willing to accept all of those things. Oh, and I neglected that Mayor Grasso has now joined the CMAP board as the DuPage County representative. So welcome, and we're excited to have you here and at the CMAP board as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I will have to leave at 10:30. Don't take that personal, but some judge has required us to be in court at 11.
Those judges, man. All right, let me turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Very good, thank you. Next is going to be the transportation safety, and Vicki Barrett will give us a update on CMAP's transportation safety work.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here in person in front of you all. I was here virtually. Let's see how this goes. I was here in April, or I was at the meeting in April virtually, providing a quick update on safety. I'll do a little bit of an expanded update on recent work that we've been doing in the transportation safety program, which we refer to as our STAR program. So I'm happy to be here. Okay, we can jump straight in. I never start a traffic safety update. Well, yeah, let me first explain that STAR is the Safe Travel for All roadmap. It is the kind of new safety program that's comprehensive at safety, that incorporates a variety of components, including public engagement with safety partners, policy development, data, improving our data and resources around traffic safety, providing technical assistance to our local partners on safety. And I will save the best part for last of this presentation, which is our new upcoming Safe Streets and Roads for All plan that we'll be working on throughout the region over the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Dramatic. Okay, that's all right. Well, I can tell you what it will show, which is the current trend in national traffic fatalities. I never start a talk about our safety program without providing the data context for why we're doing the work that we're doing. This is the national traffic fatality, so across the United States. The blue line on this chart are the annual fatalities, and the green line is the 5-year average, which allows us to kind of better understand long-term trends. The number is shocking. You know, it's last year in 2021, almost 43,000 people in the United States lost their lives on our roadway system. That's the equivalent of a Boeing 777 crashing every week, leaving no survivors for a year. That is a crisis, and it doesn't always come in the media as a crisis because these fatalities happen every day in different locations, but it is a crisis, and it's a national crisis. It's also a regional crisis. And if you can go to the next slide. You can see annual traffic fatalities in the CMAP region. The blue line is our annual fatalities. Again, the green line is our 5-year average trend. The red line down at the bottom of the chart is our Vision Zero goal, which is adopted in our 2050 plan, which is the intention of us to reduce roadway fatalities by 2050. So that's the line that we would like to be on. We are not on that line, and it's a struggle for all agencies working in transportation safety. The 2022 numbers are just coming in, and it looks like our regional traffic fatalities will drop slightly, still far above what they've been in previous years. In 2021, we were at 701 fatalities in our region, and that may be around 641 for 2022. The numbers of pedestrians and bicyclists who are dying on our roads is also increasing in our region. These users are often people who are accessing transit, or in some cases, they are people who choose not to drive or are unable to drive. And these numbers are creeping up. They are not protected by a vehicle, so they are particularly vulnerable to various aspects of traffic safety on our roads, including speed, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But an alarming trend for bicyclist and pedestrian fatalities too. And finally, traffic safety is an equity issue. These are traffic fatality rates by race. So you can see on the far right, those are our Black residents in our region. The yellow, the red is the Black residents, and the yellow is our mixed or multiple race residents in our region. And those are the rates at which they are represented in our traffic fatalities by population. So we are seeing residents of color in our region overrepresented in our traffic fatalities. I mentioned this a little earlier. Speeding is a critical issue when it comes to traffic safety. In our region, it's believed to contribute to 41% of our fatal and serious injury crashes. It's also believed that that number is underreported. Speeding is not always the best captured aspect of a crash. So it is likely higher than that speed is contributing to fatal and serious crashes. So it's been a focus of some of the work that we've been doing here, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now. In an effort to understand how to address the issue of speeding, we tried to look at it in a number of different ways. One of the ways that really revealed something compelling to us was by identifying the posted speed limit of the roads where our fatal and serious injury crashes were happening. And we were surprised to see that the highest rate of fatal and serious injury crashes is happening on roads with a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. Not 65, not 55. These are our local roads. These are our arterials. These are the roads that we live on, we shop on, we work on, we go to school on. So it's also the speed limit that represents most urban district roads in our region. So there are a lot of roads with a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. And so the point of understanding that as a dimension of speeding is that it is a job for all of us to address traffic safety. It is not a limited access highway or interstate issue. It's an issue that requires resources at the local level. It requires collaboration with local partners. It's an issue for our I'm back. Just keeping it exciting. And this is going to come up. I'm going to talk a little bit about our Safe Streets and Roads for All work that's coming up, but the focus here is really on building partnerships in safety. We all have to be working together to address this, and we can't leave it to the Department of Transportation alone. And just to reiterate, you know, these roads are not our biggest safety concern in our region right now. If you see the next slide, it's more like these roads. As I mentioned, the roads where we shop on, we work on, we live on in many cases, and they're complex environments. And this is where a lot of our safety issues and actions are focused on. I'll just mention quickly the Safe System approach, which is something that if you participate in our Safe Streets and Roads for All program in the next couple of years, you'll hear a lot about the Safe System approach. This is a new way of looking at safety that's been adopted by the FHWA and the U.S. Department of Transportation that really addresses safety holistically. And I think a couple of the things I like to mention about this is creating layers of redundancy in safety. That is really an important piece of the new traffic safety thinking, which comes from the aviation industry's approach to safety, which is making sure that one flaw in behavior or design or emergency response doesn't result in a traffic fatality. So part of the work that CMAP is doing is trying to improve the data and access to data around speeding. As I mentioned earlier, speeding is believed to be underreported. We only know that speeding is an issue when crash reports identify it as an issue, and that requires a crash to have occurred. But of course, we all see plenty of incidences of dangerous speeding that happen to not result in a crash. So we are moving forward with a regional speed data project, which is just kicked off yesterday, to be exact. And we are purchasing speed probe data from a data consolidator to understand how cars are traveling in our region. It's a very exciting project. It's a huge data project, very innovative and kind of on the cutting edge of this large data world. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about our Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. On the next slide, I think I've got some, yes, okay. So as many of you may know, part of the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act, which passed in December of 21, created one of the largest roadway safety programs in history. It is $5 billion over the course of 5 years for local governments and MPOs to improve traffic safety. It is very exciting, and CMAP was awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant in January. So I wanted to first explain the structure of the program. They are first funding the creation of safety action plans. So you can apply for the plan part as the first part of your work, and then in future years, use that plan to apply for implementation funding. CMAP applied for a regional safety action plan, which is step 1 on the left of this chart, which includes things like a leadership commitment to improve traffic safety, a really robust engagement program on improving traffic safety, strong data analysis, an equity component that runs throughout, both in terms of the engagement and the analysis, and then the identification of projects and strategies based on all of the analysis engagement to improve traffic safety. Yes, and our planning grant, we have finally received our executed agreement with the Federal Highway Administration. We are starting the process of procuring our county level safety action plans across the region, which we would hope to kick off before the end of this year. We have $4.87 million to put towards this traffic safety effort. And IDOT's been a really strong partner in supporting us with a match. We are focused on that safe system approach, improving travel safety for all, with a focus on those vulnerable roadway users who are now overrepresented in our traffic fatalities, and to build on all the existing work that's going on in the region on safety. Another aspect of what we're doing in the safety program right now is technical assistance on safety. We are about to kick off a safety action plan for the town of Cicero. We have one later this year planned in the greater Ashburn neighborhood. These are building on 3 other safety action plans that we completed last year in Bellwood, Calumet City, and Riverdale. And that is I'm happy to take questions.
Vicki, what is the SS4A implementation eligibility? What is that about?
So in order to apply for the implementation funding, you need a qualifying safety action plan. So that's why that's our first step in this process, is getting as many qualifying safety action plans complete so that our local partners can apply for implementation funding before the Safe Streets and Roads for All program ends.
And one other on the idea of the speed study. So you're finding speed is definitely linked to more accidents. So is the goal of then getting the data to figure out whether speeds need to change? I mean, kind of.
Yeah, there will be some analysis that we can apply towards that Safe Streets and Roads for All grant from that regional safety or regional speed data project, for sure. That's also an ongoing project that we expect to provide us with information for years to come as we do technical assistance with communities to identify dangerous roadways that may need speed management strategies or special crossings for vulnerable roadway users. But we absolutely plan to use it to overlay with crashes to understand where speeding is contributing to higher numbers of crashes for the planning grant.
One last question, if I may, Jeff, impaired or distracted drivers, is there any study being done on that?
Well, that is, the impaired driving is a component of speeding. So speeders are often also impaired. There's a high degree of overlap there. Distracted driving continues to elude traffic safety professionals. It's very hard to report. It's very hard to identify, but there are some innovative programs out there, including using transit riders on buses to help identify the degree to which drivers are distracted. And there's some technology improvements that are coming, but a huge issue and difficult to tackle because the numbers appear low and they're not, right? We all know that. Yeah.
Mayor Einhorn?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for this study, because what you have done is you have confirmed, for me at least, in my observations out in the south area, what I see every day. And it's a total disregard for any kind of traffic laws by virtually everybody. And that's exactly what you kind of pointed out. So it should come up as no surprise. And I don't know what it looks like in other areas of the Chicago metro area, but out by us, it's like the Wild West. And I don't know what to do about it. You know, it's great to know what the problem is. And I think a lot of people, after seeing this, will go, yeah, this is what I see. But how do you solve it? Because we left the cat out of the bag right after COVID started. And we said, lay off on traffic enforcement. Don't do this. Don't stop anybody. You're going to get the bug and all this other kind of stuff. And guess what? Now you've taught the public how not to behave by just kind of ignoring what's going on. And I don't know how you gather this, rein this thing back in now, because it seems like it's beyond reining in my estimation. So you throw a lot of money at it, but unless you can convince the police and the municipalities that govern the police to get out there and put a full court press on bad behavior, it's going to keep up. And I don't know what it looks like in all the rest of your places, but that's what I see out by us. And it frustrates me as a mayor. I grind on my police chief every day about it, but you can't get them to make traffic stops. They just don't do it. And because I think the state legislators had a hand in this too, by the stuff that's going on right now about the legislation that's going to be reviewed by the Supreme Court and talked about today. So, you know, you can't relax the laws and expect everybody to get in line. It's just not going to happen, because people just don't do that. So the study data is fabulous. It really brings into focus what I think most of us see. Again, out by me, I'm sure it's completely different than it is up in Barrington. But I don't know what you do about it, but God bless you. I hope we can figure out a way to make it happen. And honestly, you can just send that $1 trillion or whatever it is out to our area and straighten things out, because it's like the Wild West.
I'd like to just make one observation. I don't know, a couple of years ago, they outlawed quotas on traffic tickets. So we have no mechanism to enforce performance standards in our police department, how many tickets they should write on a shift. And that's the biggest problem. We can't enforce it. So what typically happens, they write 2 tickets so that they can go to court and collect 5 hours overtime. And we actually lose money when we write a ticket by the time we pay the overtime, and everybody gets a cut out of the ticket. So there's really no incentive to enforce anything, because we can't impose quotas or what we call performance standards. So that's really the crux of the whole problem.
Yeah, I mean, safety is an incredibly complex issue, and that safe system approach diagram shows all the different aspects that you need to address in order to change behavior, and some of the aspects that we haven't really fully leveraged in the United States yet is the use of design in managing speeds. We have relied incredibly on police enforcement for managing speeds in this country, and there are other ways to do it that we have not really fully leveraged. So it's another opportunity for us to leverage things like education, positive social norms, and improved design to help kind of get the cat back in the bag.
You need to make this presentation before the state legislature so they can see what they caused by their stupid laws, because that's really what the problem is. They created this.
Anybody else have any comments? I'd like to invite you out to my town, Batavia. We have had absolutely the worst year we've ever had. I had very, very bad bicycle accidents with cars. The first was a 44-year-old woman who was killed right then and there. And 2 days later, we had a 14-year-old boy who's still they flew him into Chicago to the hospital in here, and they're still not sure if he's going to make it or not. And it's the electric bike. And the electric bike now can go, I don't know, 25 or 30 miles an hour. And these folks, and we have 6-year-old kids running around our streets with these electric bikes. And I've had several people ask me, why don't we require those electric bikes to have a license plate on them? That's an interesting, I'm sure the state legislature would probably balk at that idea, but I could show you some real interesting statistics. And I have a very good police chief, and we're working on some strong enforcement ideas right now that we're going to pick up, because everything you've just said is true. This whole 30-mile-an-hour thing, they forget that, and they're just flying down there 50, 60 miles an hour. And we've figured out what streets this is happening on, and we're going to be setting up the ticket boys on these folks. So I'll have some good experiences to share with you. So please call me sometime. And
yeah,
you got my number in here. I know you do, because they call me about every day. Anybody else? Well, thank you for this. This is very informative. Appreciate it. Okay, moving to 3.3, which is the STP Project Selection Committee. Kama Dobbs is going to
All right. Good morning, mayors. Happy to see all of you in person. It's been so long. So exciting to see you all. I will keep it very brief today. Since the last executive committee meeting, the STP Project Selection Committee did meet once, and that was just last week. At that meeting, they took a look at the staff recommended FY 2024 to 2028 shared fund program and did authorize us to open public comment on that program. So public comment is now open through August 11th, and Doug Ferguson's actually going to talk a lot more about the results of the call for projects later on your agenda, so I'm not going to go on about it. The committee did also talk a bit about the unobligated balance that we're building up in the region, and I just wanted to touch on that for just a brief minute. Thinking about all of your STP projects as well as CDOTs and the shared funds that are programmed in the current year, if all of those were successful in getting their federal obligations done by September 30th, as a region, we'd be carrying over about $30 million in redistribution. However, in contrast, if none of those make it by September 30th, as a region, we'll be carrying over $168 million in unobligated funding, which is, frankly, not acceptable. 30 million really isn't acceptable. So just want to throw those numbers out there for everybody to start thinking about. We need to start getting a little bit more aggressive with our active program management at all levels. So you're going to start to hear that from us at your council meetings, thinking about how we can get more of that money obligated. So that was really it. Just wanted to put those numbers out there for us to start thinking about, and happy to take questions.
Any questions or comments? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving to 3-4 IDOT Bureau of Local Roads update. Russell Petroliak. Is Russell here?
Hello, yes, I'm here. I'm online. So I'm pinch hitting for Chad Riddle at IDOT. There are, as Chad would like to say, everything is moving along just fine. We have 9 projects that are on the targeting the August letting, another 9 targeting September. And as it stands right now, there are 33 that he is shepherding through that are targeting the November letting. We'll see what sticks on that. That would be a relatively large letting. The June letting was a relatively large letting too. Chad asked me to inform you that everything's going good at IDOT. Projects are moving forward. If you have any questions, you should contact the PLs and your field engineers. So with that, I can take any questions.
Any questions?
I'd like to.
Mayor Einhorn?
Yeah, can I just ask, again, out by me, the Bishop Ford is like a washboard, first of all. And second of all, most of the roadway, the sides and the center lanes and stuff like that, the weeds are taller than I am. Are they ever going to come out and cut anything? It looks terrible.
I put an email into IDOT. We'll see what they respond, and anything that they send me, I will be happy to share with you.
And this goes all the way from 95th to the end of 394. If you drive off the road, off the shoulder and wind up off into the dirt, nobody's going to see your car. That's how tall the weeds are.
I hear you. I understand. And like I said, we've passed the message on to IDOT, and hopefully we will hear something back from them shortly.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mayor?
We've been asking for a meeting with IDOT for a year about an additional light. I've tried to contact Chad, left numerous messages, no response. And
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of what you said.
We have requested a meeting with IDOT for an additional light to go in on Archer Avenue at roughly 67th Street. And we haven't been able to get that meeting or any response. So anything that could expedite that would be fantastic, because it involves a big project and we want to bid that out.
Okay, I will follow up with Chad. Thank you.
That was Mayor Brady from Bedford Park who was asking the questions. So you know.
That helps.
Anybody else? All right, going to 3-5 ADA planning, Jamie Jackson.
Hello, this is Jamie Jackson, the ADA program manager at CMAP. I apologize that I cannot be there to present these updates live, but we do have some exciting things that are happening in the program. In the next few months, we'll be kicking off the development of 5 public rights-of-way transition plans in the communities of Berwyn, Chicago Heights, LaGrange Park, Lamont, and Lincolnwood. We're currently preparing materials to procure consultants and finalize those scopes of work. Another project that is gearing up is the community transition plan approach, where we will deep dive into gathering regional data to measure compliance and develop ADA best practices for public rights-of-way transition plans, as well as best practices policies that may include snow clearance policies, EV charging, and other topics. Lastly, we completed a successful round of municipal trainings this spring and will be delivering training again this fall. While our program is generally limited to the public right-of-way, we understand that accessibility and municipal requirements under Title II do go much further. That's why we're partnering with the Capital Development Board for our first fall training to provide information around facilities and the requirements of the Illinois Accessibility Code. So mark your calendars for September 14th. That location is still being determined. The dates and locations of the other trainings are being coordinated right now, and we will provide information as soon as we secure the venues. Similar to the last round of trainings, we will be hosting these trainings in locations throughout the regions. We look forward to seeing folks at these trainings. We look forward to having some transition plans for the communities within the region. And if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, anything at all related to the ADA and the programs that we are doing at CMAP, please do not hesitate to email me at jjackson@cmap.illinois.gov.
Thank you. Any questions of Jamie? All right, we'll go to 3.6 Local Government Network Update. Lily Brock.
While Lily's coming to the podium, I just wanted to emphasize one point about the ADA program, if I may, is that, we really started this initiative because a couple of years ago, Federal Highway Administration noted that we are in non-compliance with our ADA and Title II requirements across the region. And the kind notion was put on the table that we could lose access to our federal highway funds that you all program at your councils. And so we have engaged in this multi-year effort to make sure that we are coming into compliance and supporting communities. So if there are things or questions that you may have, we want to make sure that we are in compliance so that the MPO Policy Board can continue to spend those federal funds on our roads and public right-of-way across the region. So wanted to just reemphasize that point. I know we've made it a couple times over COVID, but I like many people don't remember everything that I said in an online meeting on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Aaron, do they focus on something in particular? Is there a list of 5 things that they're focusing on?
That they're focusing on? We can certainly get you the information on how to prepare and what is being in compliance. And one of the requirements is that you are a municipality that has 50 or more staff. So some of our smaller communities don't necessarily need to come into compliance, but there are some things that we can help you with. So we'll make sure to pass that along. Thank you.
You're on.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. I'm Lily Brack. I'm a planner with CMAP and I'm the project manager for the Local Government Network. So last quarter, we completed our 18th initiative through the Local Government Network, where we gathered spatial zoning data from communities to help CMAP update our regional zoning database. And as a result, we received zoning data from over 85% of the communities in our region, which was a really big improvement from the last time we did this update and collected zoning data through other forms of outreach. So I think it just speaks to the success of the Local Government Network. And we also completed our 19th initiative, where we connected our LGN liaisons with the newly elected mayors and village presidents. And that was really exciting. Each mayor got a letter from Aaron, and we also passed along some helpful CMAP resources and the Local Government Network liaisons business cards. So now each community kind of knows who their go-to person at CMAP is. And then our 20th initiative, which 20 is a really exciting number. We're currently underway with the 20th initiative, where we're sharing the new CMAP community data snapshots. And those were updated earlier this month. Communities tend to find those to be really helpful, and we always get a lot of good feedback on this initiative when we do it. So the community data snapshots and sharing those has kind of become an annual initiative that's been recurring. And then later this month, we'll kick off our 3rd annual Regional Tourism Challenge, where CMAP staff compete to see who can visit the most communities throughout the region. And it's kind of a fun thing that we do, but we serve 284 communities at CMAP, and it's rare that staff get to go out and actually visit them and see them unless they're working on a specific project with them. So we like to take advantage of the competitive nature of our staff. People really enjoy it, and people can go out and see, local events, learn about the local culture, and better understand the communities that we serve. So that's it for my update. Any questions?
Maybe we should get extra points for pictures with the mayors.
Yes. All right.
Any questions?
Just,
Mayor Barch?
I think that's great. And when you do that, if you can find the village staff around, or, to let us know that you're out visiting, if we don't know the staff members, but I think it'd be I think it's another good touch point for the communities if they recognize that CMAP staff has come to an event. So
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah. So.
That's a great point. And we do try to encourage liaisons to, go out to their specific local government network communities and introduce themselves. And we'll definitely do that this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving to 3.7 Legislative Affairs, John Carpenter.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a fairly lengthy legislative affairs report today, but before we get into it, I'd like to introduce Chad Phillips, the most recent member of our staff here in legislative affairs. Chad comes to us from Senator Duckworth's office, started about 6 weeks ago or so. Chad will be responsible for our federal legislative effort and developing relationships with our delegation. He'll be working alongside Kasha, who continues to be responsible for our state legislative outreach and efforts. So with that, we'll go with the federal report first.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Good morning. My name is Chad Phillips. Here we go. I'll have to lean down a little bit here. Name is Chad Phillips. John, thank you for the introduction. I'll be just joined the CMAP team. So full disclosure, I'm going to play the new guy card as much as possible here initially, but I'll be focused on our intersection with the federal government and everything that entails. So most specifically, and just some quick updates for you. I've already started working with our team on things like our IJO working group and priority list for projects. So as we continue to track those programs that are coming from the federal side and the larger coordination that's required regionally, we'll be keeping you all up to date, sharing those updates. We had our first meeting last week for the year, and we just were going through the process from last year and how we can improve and continue to expand that process. Also, we'll be tracking, as you all may be already aware, Congress is in the middle of their appropriation process and any potential impacts on federal programs that you all likely rely on to address local issues in your communities and that we rely on here at CMAP to do the work that everybody does here. So we'll be continuing to track that. They're in the middle of that process, but I just wanted to take a second to introduce myself and make sure you all knew I was a resource and happy to share. I got some fancy new business cards already, so happy to share those with you all too at the end of the meeting. But thank you for your time. I'll hand it over to Kasha with a much more substantive state update.
All right. It's a little off. Not always tall. We're not always tall as Lily and Chad, so see if I can get it. Maybe we're gonna. If not, I can just project. That's fine. No, go ahead, Blanca. Come get it. I'm not gonna be able to do it. I thought I could do it. I'm like, help us. Thanks, Blanca. Hi, everyone. Kasha Hart with our Legislative Affairs team, just with a quick state legislative update. So since we last convened, the General Assembly wrapped up their regular session very early in the morning over Memorial Day weekend. So they approved a $50.6 billion FY24 budget, which just a couple of highlights for you all. I know LGDF is very important to this group and many of our, local elected officials throughout the region. The FY24 budget increased the LGDF distribution rate from 6.16% to 6.47%, which is projected to increase the allocation to local governments to $112 million. Obviously, this is still far away from the 2011 10% contribution rate, but it is a larger percentage increase than last year. Additionally, we made some progress on our work to secure an appropriation for CMAP to advance our non-transportation planning related work, but ultimately that proposal was not included in the FY24 budget. We really appreciate your efforts to speak with your legislators on the importance of this issue, and we are discussing internally a strategy for how we want to approach this question in the FY25 budget. So just a couple of transit and transportation related bills to update you all on as well, in addition to the budget. So there was one transportation transit omnibus bill that progressed this session, that's HB 1342. So that made a number of transit related changes. It allows the service boards to confiscate fare media and suspend riding privileges for riders that threaten safety or commit public indecency. It requires the service boards to only enter into contracts for bus purchases for zero emission buses starting in 2026. It enables a 2-year extension of the fare box recovery ratio requirement waiver, and it requires the service boards to report on a number of different performance metrics during that 2-year time period. The bill also requires the RTA to study the feasibility of providing year-round free and reduced fares, and just overall creating a more equitable transit fare system. So that's the transit omnibus bill. We also had HB 2068 that was passed by both houses. This bill requires certain employers to provide pre-tax transit benefits to their employees. And then finally, just one last bill to update you all on is House Bill 2878. So this is the procurement omnibus bill. There was an amendment filed to this bill that made a number of changes to the Public-Private Partnerships for Transportation Act, and that includes removing reference to MPOs in the statute and removing the language that requires PPP projects be compliant with the regional plan. While a state cannot, change what our federal requirements are as an MPO, we do think it's important that that language be retained in the Public-Private Partnership statute. So that's good state policy, and it's aligned with the goals of regional transportation planning. So we raised our concerns with Leader Hoffman, who was the sponsor of this legislation. He agreed that he would work with us during veto session on restoring that language. And so that is what our plans are for the October veto session, is working with our partners to get that language back in the act. So with that, I know we have a full agenda, but happy to take any questions there may be.
I think this is a good opportunity for you to get with Vicki Barrett and talk about leaning on the state legislature about the speed stuff and the traffic and all those things. Because if they don't hear from this group, I mean, who's above us? Nobody. We need to start twisting some arms in Springfield to get this stuff turned around. So, it's great to talk about it, but you got to talk about it to the right people, because they're obviously not getting it from us. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor. And I know, we have a lot of, safety and data related resources that we've shared previously in briefings, and I shot her a message after your comments today, because I think there are some more resources we can make sure to send along to the legislature as well. We know this is an issue that's top of mind.
It's obviously a cause and effect circumstance. Not more complicated than that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we are now turning to information items. Item 4.1 is recommended CMAP, CRP, TAP-L, and STP shared fund programs, and Doug Ferguson is going to chat with us about that.
Good morning. As detailed in the memo that's in your packet today, we held a joint call for the STP shared fund, CMAC, carbon reduction and locally programmed TAP projects. The call was held for project applications between January and March of this year. We received 129 applications across all 4 funding programs. Staff evaluated the applications according to the methodologies approved by the STP and then CMAQ and TAP project selection committees to determine eligibility and final scoring in each of the programs. These evaluations led to the development of 4 recommended programs, which were presented to the respective project selection committees last week on July 13th. The project selection committees agreed to release the proposed programs for public comment, which will close on Friday, August 11th. The 4 programs combined together had $593 million in federal funding for 66 different projects, which included bicycle and pedestrian, bridges, emissions reduction, highway, and transit projects that are sponsored by the City of Chicago, suburban municipalities, counties, IDOT, the RTA, and the transit service boards. More than half of the recommended projects were locally sponsored by suburban municipalities. With the STP Shared Fund, it was 17 out of 19 projects. And for the CMAQ Carbon and TAP program, it was 23 out of 47 projects were all within suburban municipalities. More detail about each of the recommended programs was contained in the memo and is along with links to our Call for Projects website, which has details on the programs and also how to submit your public comments, which will close on August 11th. And then after that point in time, staff will bring back the comments to the project selection committees for their consideration and make any potential changes to the programs before final approval recommending the programs to the Transportation Committee, which will meet on September, 31st, or no, 22nd, which hopefully they will recommend approval to the MPO, the joint meeting of the MPO Policy Committee and CMAP Board on August 11th. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take those now.
Any questions of Doug? Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, the staff will now provide an update on the new work kicking off in response to the US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And Nora Beck is going to present that.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me okay? No. I got to learn how to do that. Thank you. All right, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I am Nora Beck. I'm CMAP's program lead for air quality and water resources. I am here to provide you with an update on our current regional climate action planning activities, but also give you an update on some new funding opportunities that are coming down the line. I've been working very closely with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and specifically Edith Macra, the Director of Environmental Initiatives on this. Unfortunately, she has her Environment Committee today, so she couldn't join us. All right, so before I get started, I want to step through some framing on our current climate crisis, our collective role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then review what partners are doing as well as CMAP before I start talking about this new program. All right, so next slide. Yeah, next one after that, thanks. All right, so the climate crisis is here. Scientists have reached overwhelming consensus on climate change is intensifying, and the consequences of climate change are diverse. I'm sure you guys are seeing this in your municipalities. In Northeastern Illinois, we're experiencing larger storm events that are leading to flooding. We have extreme heat. We see more freeze-thaw cycles in winter, and that can damage our infrastructure. And then we are seeing the climate changes elsewhere in the nation and across the globe. As a freight hub and a global city, those impacts there could also impact us here. And so while every region is or every community is going to experience these impacts differently, we know that the impacts are already having disproportionate harm on communities of color and low-income communities because of those historic disinvestment and exclusion trends that we've seen in the past. It is not too late for us to address this issue. We're going to have to adapt to the baked-in changes to climate, but we can really avoid the worst impacts of these changes. And the consensus is that we need to have rapid and deep reductions of greenhouse gas emissions to stabilize our climate. And that's really meaning that we need to hit net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. The next slide shows that our emissions are declining, which is good news, but they're not going down fast enough. ON2 2050 recommends that we intensify our climate mitigation efforts, and it established a reduction target of 80% reduction in GHG relative to 2005 levels by the year 2050. That's convoluted. But we also know that given recent climate research as well as inaction since we adopted the plan, we need to get to net zero emissions by the year 2050. CMAP regularly does a regional greenhouse gas inventory, and our last one was conducted for the year 2019. We saw a decline of 9% of emissions since 2010. And that's driven by the transition in our electricity sector away from coal. But we have seen an increase in transportation emissions of 2% during that time period. Just to touch a little bit more on transportation emissions in the next slide, we know that nationally transportation generates the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions. And in our CMAP region, that's about 32% of emissions. Reducing these emissions is key to hitting those climate reduction goals, and it's really something that requires regional coordination. The overwhelming majority of these emissions are on road, so that's our cars and our trucks. And parsing out those on-road emissions a little bit further, we know that freight accounts for a significant share of those emissions. So while passenger vehicles have more vehicle miles traveled in the region, the freight emissions account for about 30% of the on-road emissions. Fortunately, CMAP and our partners can tackle these issues. And CMAP, we hope, can, as a convener and as a developer of regional policy with all of our stakeholders, means that we are well suited to collaborate together and work on this. It's an issue that has regional implications, and it's one of those sticky, complex problems that will face us for years to come. I did want to highlight the progress that we have made to date. So a couple, if you could advance the slides, just a few more slides here. Yeah, next one. So this is just a quick outline of all of the regional progress that stakeholders have taken. We've got the energy sector making great strides to reduce emissions as they transition away from coal towards less carbon intensive fuel sources. CTA and PACE have made commitments to change their fleet. We have progress on electric vehicles, and then a number of municipal and county level climate action plans. We also have seen the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus with their climate action plan for the Chicago region adopted in 2021. That's a great resource if you haven't already checked it out. It really details a variety of different actions that can be taken in different sectors to reduce emissions. I also wanted to touch on CMAP's work in this area in the next slide. So I alluded to this before. We regularly maintain a regional greenhouse gas inventory. That's updated every 5 years. We skipped 2020 because that was an odd year, and we provided you with a 2019 assessment. The inventory includes emissions from buildings, transportation, and waste, and all data is reported at the county level. CMAP also maintains a less detailed emission summary for all of the region's 284 municipalities and 77 Chicago community areas. So this shows emissions from most sources. You can download it for your municipality. Gives you a jump start on that data collection, so you don't have to go do that as you figure out your climate action plans. Moving on the list, you're going to hear a more detailed presentation about the plan for action for regional transit later in this agenda. We know that maintaining and improving the region's robust regional transit system will be essential for reducing transportation emissions. We also have a transportation project analysis tool in development that will help us evaluate the benefits of different projects, and including the climate benefits, and it will help us move towards project selection and help us reduce those transportation emissions that have been increasing. We also have EV infrastructure plan work, housing rehabilitation. So we're working on a variety of different fronts to incorporate climate action. I wanted to end this quick summary by also talking about the co-benefits. So many of the strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will have a variety of different co-benefits hitting on a lot of the items that we talked about today, whether it's the safety, the transit, reducing our use of fossil fuels will clean our air for ozone and particulate matter. We can make our streets safer, build communities that are healthier and more active, providing better access to job centers, and ultimately cutting energy and transportation costs for our residents. So I wanted to switch gears and talk about a new opportunity that the US EPA has put out. The Inflation Reduction Act established $5 billion to support state and regional development and implementation of plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And CMAP has partnered with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to complete this work for the region. I'm going to step through some of these program details. So there's two phases. The first phase is planning. The second phase is implementation, and we're in the planning phase right now. This first phase is providing funding for all states and all of the largest metro regions and tribes to develop climate action plans that meet specific requirements. And once those plans are complete, they're going to help guide the focus of another $4.6 billion in implementation dollars. Now, I don't have a lot of details on that. I hope to come back to you and provide a summary of that information. The US EPA will be launching that this fall, and they're really hoping for municipal contributions and implementation projects through that effort. So MMC submitted a notice of intent to participate in this planning effort with CMAP, and we're going to cover the whole metropolitan statistical area, so including some counties in Indiana and Wisconsin. And the program is also designed to advance the goals of Justice 40, which aims to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of the federal investment to disadvantaged communities. So I wanted to share some of the insights that MMC and CMAP had as we were laying out our program objectives. We wanted to make sure, great, thanks. This map provides a viewpoint of the jurisdiction of the planning area. But as we were talking about, we wanted to have several objectives to figure out how we will tackle this issue. And first and foremost, we want to harness existing work and partner expertise. So a lot of communities have already been doing climate action plans. They've learned a lot through that process. And we want to be sure to incorporate that in our effort. And second, we want to position the region to be competitive for those implementation dollars. The US EPA will be releasing more information about that this fall, the $4.6 billion. That's a one-time shot and probably pretty competitive, but I think we can pull it together and get more funding for our efforts that way. And then long term, we know that that's just going to be a drop in the bucket in what we're talking about. And so we really need to leverage the additional processes and other funding sources for long-term action. In the next slide, you can see the three main deliverables that the US EPA is calling for. The first is what they're calling a priority climate action plan. And this is due sort of immediately. It's March 2024, so that deadline is going to be upon us shortly, but we're in a very good position with the MMC's climate action plan. It already meets several of the requirements that US EPA is putting out. We'll just have to do some slight edits to update the information, but we're in a good position to get that deliverable done. The second one is the comprehensive climate action plan. This is something that CMAP will be leading. It needs to cover all greenhouse gas sources and sinks, with a variety of different strategies. So that includes industry, electricity generation, transportation, commercial and residential buildings, agriculture, natural lands, and working lands, and waste and materials management. So we'll have that strong foundation of the MMC climate action plan. And really, we want to use this opportunity to advance our regional policy. And that's due the summer of 2025. And then we'll close out this 4-year cycle in summer of 2027 with a status report where we really want to be able to document the implementation that has occurred in the region on this issue. The next slide, just a reminder, if you haven't checked it out already, the MMC Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region is going to be a very valuable resource. It's already useful, so please check it out. In that plan, the next slide, you can see that we are using the best available data at that time, which was our 2015 greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll be updating this, but it really steps through how all the different strategies that are outlined in the plan can help us reach our goals. And so you'll probably see a lot more of these colored wedge diagrams coming from us in the future. And then
last but not least, I did want to talk about some clean energy. Another opportunity that we're pursuing. The Department of Energy has released a Clean Energy to Communities in-depth technical assistance proposal. We applied with ComEd and the Respiratory Health Association to get some national lab support and in doing some advanced modeling to better understand the extent and scale of the strategies that are needed just for the transportation sector. So we hope to be able to announce more about that in the future. And with that, I've got a couple of questions. I'm not sure if you have time in your agenda, Mayor, to discuss these, but these were some ideas and happy to take any questions or comments. Each state, and I should have mentioned this before, the state of Illinois is also pursuing a climate plan. So they got $3 million. Each state gets $3 million, and each metro statistical area in the nation gets $1 million. Those are for the largest ones.
Other questions? You know, I'd just like to offer you an experience. I'm all for what you're talking about here. It's a real deal. I've got an environmental commission in my town that's trying to get things going. So one of the things they suggested to my city council is that we impose, as of July 1st, a 10-cent fee for every bag that any store gives any customer, be it plastic or paper. And I will tell you, all hell is broke loose. In 42 years in office, I have never had as many calls, as many nasty emails, as much bad publicity on the computer as we did over the 10-cent bag thing.
Yeah.
And I had 3 aldermen vote against it to begin with. And we're going to a meeting tonight, and I'm not so sure there aren't 4 more that are willing to jump on the bandwagon. So we may be retracting this bag tax. I mean, it did not work. It's bad because we've had several businesses come in and say they wanted to come to town, and now their realtors are telling me, well, they're going to go up to the next town because you got this bag tax and think you're going to scare customers away. So, I mean, I don't know where that's going, but just to alert everybody here, if you got somebody talking to you about a bag tax.
This is when you want to be a non-home rule community.
Right. And
so you can't impose such a tax anyway.
Right, right.
That's the problem.
But put on your political suit of armor if you do it, I'll tell you that, because but I mean, I invite you to come out sometime and meet with our people, and we'll chit chat with you about because I think this is something that's going to be into the region. Right now, I'm told there's only like 5 of us in the region that have the bag tax.
Okay. Yeah, I have to admit, Mayor, I'm not as familiar with the plastic or paper bag tax. I'm hoping that through this effort and through the analysis that CMAP can provide really provide some direction on what will be the most effective strategies for greenhouse gas emissions and sort of build some understanding of that these are the strategies that really could lead to some results. And I think it does require some regional coordination and making sure that we're all moving in this direction. So people can't go to the next town over.
Yeah, I'm not going to name them, but I've had several calls from fellow mayors in the last couple of weeks asking what's our experience about it. And one of the larger cities in the region, the mayor called me and he says, well, Jeff, I appreciate what you're telling me. I got them at my city council wanting us to impose it, but I'm going to tell them we're not going to be interested in doing this till we've kind of fine-tuned this process and maybe do some regional public education to everybody about what it is this is really all about. Because boy, it's been brutal. I mean, I'm glad I'm not up for election right now.
Well, good luck tonight.
Anybody else?
I just have an observation. You know, right now, electric vehicles are still, I think, the preserve of the more affluent people because of the cost of the vehicle, the cost of the infrastructure. Secondly, the electrical grid is not in a position to accept the electrical vehicles. In our town, it's very common. You have 4 or 5 cars per household. You plug those all in at the same time, you're going to have a 400 amp service in a house, and ComEd is not ready to provide a 400 amp service to every house, especially if you're talking electric stoves, or electric furnaces, electric hot water heaters on top of charging the vehicles. So I really think in a lot of cases, this push for electric vehicles is kind of putting the cart before the horse, because the supporting infrastructure is not there. And the cost has to come down because a town like ours, in electric vehicles, I go to Elmhurst, there's a ton of them. Our town, not so much.
Yeah, I've had some conversations with Edison about that, and they are concerned about the demand that those vehicles could put on their system. I mean, I think there's going to have to be some new nuclear reactors brought into this region to really sustain that and support it. Because right now you've got, the system has a little bit of a relaxing service to itself at nighttime, but you bring all the cars home at night and plug them in the garage all night long, you're never going to cut that relaxed part of the system down. It's going to be very, very structural, strenuous on it.
And that's one of the main, that's one of the main questions that we're pursuing with our grant application to the Department of Energy, being able to work with ComEd and understand, as we make shifts in the transportation sector, what is the relationship with the electricity grid, and what what is the pace that the EV transition can be supported, and what do we need to do to make that more smooth as we go forward.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this up because this is a thing this group needs to have in its focus, and hopefully our next meeting we can have some more conversation about this, because I think some of the rest of you may have your own electrical experiences that will be showing up. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, the staff will now provide an update of new work kicking off in response. No, it's next. I'm sorry. I'm losing my place here. For our last presentation today, staff will provide an update on recent work related to the plan of action for regional transit. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. We only do small things here, save the climate and now save the transit system. So we'll try to get through saving the transit system in 10 minutes or less, but really look forward to having this conversation with you today. And we can go to the next slide. As Aaron mentioned, next slide, these double things. We are really looking at how do we support the transit system, not only because it's part of what we do here in the transportation mobility, but really because it's about the people of the region. And we know that it's the backbone of our entire transportation system. And whether you're in Joliet or Geneva or LaGrange or Chicago, transit is there in different ways. And as Aaron mentioned earlier, we may experience in different ways throughout the region, but it's important for our healthcare, access to schools, jobs, climate, as Nora just mentioned, and also for the economic health of our region. And so we've been talking about all of these issues as we look at trying to come up with some recommendations for the transit system fiscal viability. Next slide. As we know, the fiscal cliff is coming, and as Aaron mentioned, the 20% cut in the budget that we're facing right now in 2026 would be up to 40% in the region of service. Next slide. So I think what we want to think about is really how would that impact your communities, kind of bringing us back to center about what would that look like? We talked about congestion and safety earlier. If our transit system was cut by 40%, how would that impact our communities? Next slide. We've already experienced it already. You don't even have to think about what it might be like. We're seeing it right now with many of you, like myself, that live on the north or northwest side and suburbs have already experienced what it looks like when congestion gets bad on the Kennedy, beyond bad. We've seen it. Metra has already increased service. CTA has increased service because I know my train is full now coming into the city because of the congestion on the Kennedy with the new work. Next slide. Think about your communities that have already built around the transit. If those lines go away, as we mentioned, what that does to your economic downtowns within communities from Richton Park to Barrington to Des Plaines. So many of you have done great work already on transit-oriented development. We want to make sure that we respond to keep those economic services growing. Next slide. The other thing we've talked about is how transit gets us around the region to different destinations that we want to be in, and that's part of the economic development. And we've seen it already. We've had some great focus groups. We were talking to the tourism bureaus, and we were thinking about destinations. And they were talking to us about employment, which I think was amazing to think about. It was less about getting people to the destinations and more about getting employees to hotels, convention centers, restaurants, so that those tourism things can happen throughout the region. So transit plays a critical part in all of this. So next slide. So why are we here? The General Assembly mandated us. So that's the first step, but we think it's important and it's very critical work as we talk about the entire mobility system, that if we are going to have $700 million lost to our transit system, we do want to have recommendations to move those things forward. So again, they've asked us to look in several different buckets, which I'll talk about today as we look at bringing our recommendations, as Aaron said, to the board and MPO this fall. I think it's important as we think about this, that there's really I kind of think of it as a three-legged stool of people who are helping us come up with these recommendations. Our board will be voting on this. The MPO, which has all the implementers, Council of Mayors, all of our counties represented will be voting on this as well. And then we have a steering committee that Aaron mentioned that was part of the legislative mandate that brings kind of the non-implementers and non-elected officials to the table. So we really have that three-legged stool of hearing all of that information. Next slide. So our other three-legged stool is going to go. We've kind of broken this up in the system we want, how we're going to pay for it, and how we're going to implement it. We've been here talking to you in the past about the system we want, and I'm not going to go into a lot of that today, but it's really about getting people back on transit and not asking the General Assembly for hundreds of millions of dollars without seeing improvements to our transit system. When we've been out talking, we've been hearing people want more transit, not less. And so how do we improve the system? That includes improving our bus system, improving safety and security, ADA and technological accessibility, fare integration and affordability, improving regional rail and the metro system, and other land use improvements that we could be recommending. But today I want to talk about the how to pay for it. If we think 10 cents a bag is going to be problematic, you're going to love the things I talk about today. Next slide. So when we started this process, next slide, we started to look at how are we currently funding our system. So as you see here, and I know this is difficult to read, but basically the green is fares. It's how we're funding our system is through fares, and the blue are different sales tax that we have. Then the middle section is other, or the real estate tax in the city of Chicago, and state supported pieces of the transit system. So I want to talk a little bit about how we're looking at how we're going to recommend that the state of Illinois help us fund our transit system through those lenses. Next slide. So system generated revenues, fares. We understand that there are some fares in our system that have held low for many years. And so we do understand that there's probably going to need to be some fare increases, but we also understand that needs to be complemented with a low income fare subsidy. We want to make sure that people who are in need can still have access to the system. We also know that we want to have the state work with us on the fare box recovery ratio. Again, having by statute, 50% of the transit system funded by fares is not something that has been super realistic for our region and isn't going to be in the future. So can we have other performance metrics besides just the fare box recovery ratio as we move forward? Next slide. Kind of this other bucket, some of the state contributions right now, many of the other regions in our state, as well as in other states, they pick up the cost of the paratransit and ADA accessibility. We think that's a key piece of our transit system right now that comes off of the top. And so reduces all of the other transit revenues we can use. It is a service. And we're also hearing this is extremely important through the communities in our region that allow people to age in place, that paratransit, which is a growing cost, still be maintained for the region. And so we think that's a very critical piece that the state could be working with us on. The other things we're looking at, as we talked earlier about, is being able to have some different road and vehicle sources, but however, we know already that the motor fuel tax is declining because of EV use, which we want to be supportive of. So how do we look at what other road system users so that we can look at different options for that, which is actually on the next slide. So these are kind of a menu of options. These are not necessarily what we're recommending to date, but these are things we're looking at, is if we have a parking fee in downtown Chicago or cordon pricing. We've talked about a lot of those as things that we've looked at and what would that actually look like in our state and in our region. We've looked at, again, we've talked here a lot in our 2040, 2050 plan about road usage charge and what we're going to need that for both the road system as well as the transit system. So these are all the options we're taking a look at. And what we want to do is put a package together that will equate to the benefits that will happen on the transit system. Next slide. Sales tax. So again, about half of what we're funding our transit system right now is through a sales tax. We do understand that right now we have about 0.25% that goes to the counties. We also know that this is getting matched after legislation in Springfield by the state. So we can look at different options to either improve, increase, or increase match with the sales tax. But as we've been looking at this, next slide, so what we've started to look at really is that we have an option to just adjust the sales tax rate as one of our recommendations, but we understand that this is actually problematic. Sorry, it's the next slide too, that we want to, if we look at goods, the goods in our region are actually declining for how much we're purchasing, whereas in services are actually increasing. One of the examples that we've used before is you used to go to a Best Buy and purchase a software update and you would have a tax on that. Now that's downloaded or that's through a service that you're using for your computer updates and there's no tax on that. So we're seeing the decline of goods with the increase of services. So next slide, what we think is a better way to go is to broaden the base of what we're using with sales tax to services, where you could actually then reduce the tax on goods. And so we think that that actually improves equity as well by shifting the tax burden. We understand this is kind of a long-term issue and would not necessarily be able to be addressed immediately for our transit system, but we do think that instead of just raising the rate on goods, that this is a movement that would be best approached for the state. Next slide. So we've talked about that. So what kind of category of services? It wouldn't be business to business. It wouldn't be housing and utilities and healthcare, but we are looking at the other services and what that would raise in revenue. We also understand that this wouldn't all be for transit. Right now, again, as we've discussed, the way that the taxes come in, this would also be a benefit for the municipalities and counties. So you would also receive the benefit of the change of taxes. So we're in discussions right now about all of these options. And we also realize that it's kind of a scenario planning exercise of how much we need to raise for the transit system. So when we match that with the system improvements that we're recommending, we're going to have three buckets that we're going to be looking at, three scenarios. You'll have a $500 million scenario, a $1 billion scenario, and a $1.5 billion scenario. And what we want to be able to show is what it's going to take in order to get what revenue needs to be raised in order to get all of the things we want for system improvements in each of those scenarios. So that's kind of where we are right now. So you can see if this is the kind of improvement you want, this is the kind of revenue we're going to need to be raising. We hope by the next month that we'll have those kind of slimmed down and we'll be able to share all of that with you as well. And so the next slide is just discussion, because I want to stop before we get into the governance elements to see about if there's any questions on the revenue piece of the plan.
Any questions? Mayor Sherwin.
Just, you know, they're going to extend the metro service out to Rockford. And I understand the state is putting $275 million to upgrade the line and everything. But the last I looked, Rockford's in Winnebago County outside of the sales tax area. So what is the long term? Once it's up and operating, who's paying for that additional extension outside of the RTA sales tax area?
So I've had some conversations about that to understand who's paying for the operating service as well. My understanding is that they're treating it like it is an intrastate transportation line. And typically intrastate travel really is the operations of Amtrak. But in this case, the state would build it into their budget. So the state annually pays Amtrak about $50 million for the state supported lines that are in the state, that they would treat this like that. And so the operations would come from that, not from detracting from the current RTA sales tax bucket.
Then you have the situation in Kendall County where they are not in it, the state of Illinois passes a bill giving them $100 million to retrofit RTA track into Kendall County. And then you have people sitting on the county board advertising that they're going to run for election totally opposed to the RTA sales tax. They'll never let it come into Kendall County. So there's a big political mix going on out here in this region as to who's going to pay for it, who won't pay for it, who's fighting it. I really commend the board in trying to find some way to put this together, but somebody needs to go to the legislature and tell them to stop passing these special bills that at the end is the RTA. I sat in a meeting, they said to get this track to Kendall County was more like 300 million than 100 million. So they're still down there wandering around trying to figure out who's going to give them the money. So this thing's got all kinds of legs on it that aren't working, and I don't know where it's going to go, but it's very problematic.
I have a question. When you're going to do this analysis, you know, things on the north side and the west side and the south side are all different from each other. And I have a problem with the mentality that one size fits all to address costs. And are you able to break down things in that fashion?
For the
services are a lot different. Out where I'm at, we can't get to this part of the city of Chicago unless you take the Metro Electric, and then you got to figure out a way to get from over there to over here, where everybody else comes in either Ogilvy or Union Station, and it's a different mix. And I just think that it needs to be more focused area wise when it comes to what you're going to do with your where the funding's going to come from, keeping in mind that the RTA tax originated in Crete, whether you know that or not.
Did not know
W.
that.
Robert Blair was the state legislator that lived in Crete that was able to get the RTA tax passed back in every year, 1970 or something like that. So I feel like I can ask that question for that reason.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that's the other piece of going out and speaking with everyone in the region is transit is very different throughout our region and what people have accessibility to, and then where those different funding sources come from and how it's used the region. So it's definitely something we have in mind.
Any other questions?
I have two quick slides to just tee up what we'll talk about next time. If, you know, taxes wasn't fun enough, we'll talk about governance structures. One of the things, actually, if you'll go back just really quickly, one of the things that the legislation asks us to look at is the governance of the RTA and the 3 service boards. I've had a lot of conversations about this. We do know that there is, again, to your conversation, a new method or a better way of doing funding allocation to align with our regional goals and where we're using the funding. So we think that's a part of the governance piece. We also know that's really important that there's local input and that the mayors and the region have feeling that they can have a voice within this conversation throughout the region. So we're really moving forward looking at that option. So we're kind of next slide now, looking at 4 options right now, where kind of the first 2 options are whether you have a stronger regional agency. So this is an RTA plus, right? If you think about that, which they would have the ability to look at things like regional fare policy and integration and be able to move those things forward. The second one kind of a stronger RTA plus, where they have more ability to look at different things along the region. And the last 2 are options where you don't have the 3 service boards, you have one agency that has all of them together. We are at a place right now where we're just reviewing these options. We're working with the third party Eno Center for Transportation to pros and cons, look at what's happening in other places in the country, to have conversations about how we want to move these forward. So next conversation we'll have with you is really breaking those down, looking at what that would mean, what are the pros and cons, and those are the conversations we're again having with board, MPO, and the steering committee as well. So look forward to having more conversations about that. Next steps, we've got white papers that are being posted on our website. We continue to be out through the region. I've been to McHenry and we'll be on DuPage and Kane. So we're moving through the region to have more conversations with our region about this. That goes to the board and MPO in September as a draft, and we're hopeful for an approval of these set of recommendations to go to the General Assembly for them to move forward with it in October. I'm happy to talk with anyone after.
Any questions? Look forward to talking to you again. Okay, that concludes our information items. Our next item is other business. Do we have any other business to come before the board? Do we have anybody in the audience that wish to address the board this morning? Do we have anybody online that wants to address us? Okay. Hearing none, we will move, I guess, next. Yeah, you want me to have. Our next meeting will be on August 15th, 2023, and will be held in person at CMAP's office at the old post office. This meeting was added to the schedule so that the committee has the opportunity to comment on the part recommendations as well as the CMAP, TAP, CRP, and STP shared fund recommendation programs prior to the September Transportation Committee meeting and the joint CMAP Board and Policy Committee meeting in October. Please mark the date on your calendar and plan to attend so we can be sure we have a responsible quorum. With that being said, I guess.
Can I just make one comment?
Absolutely.
We didn't vote on anything here except for the minutes, and it doesn't sound like we're going to be voting on anything at the next meeting. Can't we do this in the form of a webinar, not so much as a meeting, so that we could just do it remotely?
You know, because it's a public body, we have to be compliant with OMA.
Well,
I
would call it, if we're not voting on anything, why not just, like I say, just dial in for a lecture?
We can send you videos on things in advance, for sure. But I do think if we're going to have a public forum and discussion, we have been advised to follow.
This is pretty important stuff we're getting ready to talk about here. So I think it's probably best we try to do this in person.
Okay.
We can work with IML on updating OMA requirements next legislative session, if that's a priority for this committee. I don't know that I have any control over that, though.
A reminder that if you did not sign in before we started, please be sure to sign in before you leave. And there being no other business, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Do I have a second?
Second, and
all those in.
Jeff, do we need to sign in, or are we recorded in the minutes as having been present?
You're recorded in the minutes. We're good.
Okay.
Members are recorded in the minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll
I'm
second.
just reading my script here. That being said, we have a motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? With all in favor via the vote, this meeting is now adjourned, and I thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Excellent job. And don't forget about the tour afterwards.
Oh yeah, if anybody like to
If you're
tour the
interested in a
building,
tour, Jane is nearby.
we're gonna have a tour.
Got till noon to get out of here, so.
Okay.
I'll take